Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. I am your host, Christy Haberman. I am glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of our community. A few disclaimers before we get started. I am a licensed therapist. However, this podcast is not to be considered mental health therapy or counseling. It is for entertainment purposes only and is not associated with my counseling practice, Christy Haberman Counseling Services. Thanks for showing up. Today on Grieving Insomniacs, we're going to talk about the loss of identity that comes after you have lost a child. For me, in my grief journey, it started the day after Christopher died. I woke up the next morning wondering, who am I? Now that I don't have a child, my oldest child, who am I? I had Christopher when I was 19 years old. I was a single parent. I didn't have the best relationship with my family. I'd been kind of isolated. So Christopher was my family. He's the one that I depended on. He was my family, and he wasn't there no more. I was asking myself, who am I? I was 45 years old when he died. And I think back to I was 19 when he was born, and I'd been Christopher's mom for more years than I'd been alive. And I was really wondering, so when he dies, what does that make me? Does that make me still a mom? So when someone asks me, someone new, and this is a fear that still lasts to this day, I hate being introduced to people. I hate it. The first thing people will say to you is, how many children do you have? And I still don't know how to answer that question. And within myself, I've come to the conclusion that I say that I have two. And then I try to change the conversation as fast as possible, because I don't want to talk about it anymore beyond that. But back to the beginning. So in the beginning, so you're in shock right away after your child dies, and you try to hold it together because there's so many things grabbing your attention. You have to plan a funeral. You have to, in my case, he was an adult child. I had to figure out how I was going to get him home, what I was going to do with his apartment. There was a lot of details that took up a lot of my time, but in the back of my head, all I could think about was, am I still a mom? Am I still a mom? And I've talked to many women over the years, and we all talk about those first initial thoughts that we have of, am I still a mom? And everyone has to, I believe, as part of their grief process, come to an understanding of what they believe about that. And how you're going to answer those questions. I know I've talked to some women that really work hard at keeping their child's memory alive, because they want to hold on and say, yes, my child existed. And for me, I didn't worry about that so much, but the impact it had on who I was. So much of my life. So I said I was 19 when my son died. I didn't really have any direction in my life at that time. I was a single parent, no education. And so when I had Christopher, I knew I had to be something better. I had to be better than I was, because I had somebody I had to take care of. And so my life goals became about creating a better life for him. I went back to school, as hard as that was. I lived in low-income housing. I did everything that I could to get an education. I got a bachelor's degree, then I got a master's degree. And all of that I did so that I could provide for my kids. So after I had Christopher, I had my second son, Colin. And all of my goals were always to provide for them. And I took a lot of pride in that identity, especially as they got older. And so after he died, it was like, who am I? How am I going to answer this question? I remember asking people too. I remember asking, so am I still a mom? And they were like, of course you're still a mom. I was like, can you be a mom to a dead kid? Like, how does that even work? And for me, I have very non-traditional um, spiritual beliefs. I'm not religious. I'm going to have a whole podcast on the impact of religion on death and how you question your spirituality. But for me, um, I didn't really have that idea. So I was like, who am I? So I didn't really have this concept of heaven. So that didn't help matters any either. So it's like, how can I still be a mom? How can that happen? And over the years, I think it was probably um, I'd say year 2. I think it took me 2 years to decide how I was going to answer that question about am I going to still be a mom? And I had decided that I would still say that I had 2 children. And like I said, I try to distract people from asking me, oh, I have 2 children. And then I try to direct the conversation back to them. And I'm kind of good at it because I'm a therapist. So I direct the questions back to them. But then invariably, especially if there's someone that pays attention, they ask about you. So then they ask, oh, so where do they live? And I'm like, okay. So then I go a step farther. They live in Sturgis. And then they say, oh, what do they do? So I try to deflect a little bit, talk about my youngest son. And then at this point, I start to get annoyed. I don't want to answer your questions. But if they really push me, like really, really push me, when they start questioning about where my oldest child lives, I say the Bear Butte Cemetery. And that'll get them to shut up. And in our society, I've got to tell you, women, we have got to quit connecting with other people based on how many children they have. We got to quit living our lives through our children because it is one of the most painful parts of being a grieving mom. You tell someone that you lost a child, and I talk about this all of the time, and they turn around and they walk away. And that's the last you ever see of them. So imagine what it's like for the mom that's lost a child, and you're just meeting them. And this person's trying to bond with you over the fact that you have children, and you tell them that your child died. Now, the person receiving that message is not prepared to hear that answer, so they're a little speechless. And the conversation just stops. And you're left feeling, as the grieving mom, that somehow you made this person uncomfortable because you talked about what was important to you, which was, I still have 2 children. One of them may be dead, but I still have 2 children. And in our society, that is really taboo. We don't like to talk about that. And I'm just really not sure why that is. And so I can tell you that this whole impact of whether I'm a mom or not has really evolved after Christopher died into an issue that I deal with pretty much on a regular basis, because nothing makes you question whether or not you're a mom or a good enough mom until you've lost a child. So I know right after Christopher died, I have this going through my head. Am I still a mom? What am I going to say? And then there was, his friends too that were telling me that they thought that I was not a good mom, and that because I wasn't there when Christopher died, that I was not a good mom. And that really made me start to question myself anymore. And it's got to be one of the most cruelest things that I think that you could do to someone that's in that grieving state, is to offer up any criticism whatsoever. And those of you who have lost children, you've heard it. I know that you have heard it. You've heard the people say, oh, my personal favorite, which is, well, at least they're with God. They're in a better place. Yeah, they're not. The better place would have been here with me. They deserve to be with their parents. So like I said, this was running through my mind throughout preparing for the funeral, throughout everything. But I think that it really started to hit home because I had to go to where Christopher lived, and Christopher lived in Louisiana, and to pack up his apartment. So this had been a week after he died. I had to, and I had to go and clean out his apartment. And I remember walking into an apartment I'd never been into before and realizing that I didn't know who this person was that lived in this apartment. It smelled like smoke. Evidently, my son was a heavy smoker. That's something that he had kept from me. It was decorated, had his belongings in there, but they're all things I'd never seen before. So it was like walking into this stranger's apartment. So then I really started to question, like, who am I? If my son smokes so much, how come I didn't know this? I mean, keep in mind he's 25 years old, and lots of things that 25-year-olds do when they're away from their parents, we don't know about. But that doesn't help when you're not thinking rationally, when you're not thinking about when your mind is broken. And my mind was very much broken. And so we started to pack up his things, and I realized while I was packing up his things that I was not ready. I was not ready to say that Christopher was gone and he wasn't coming home, because then who was I? If I wasn't Christopher's mom, who was I? And if he was dead, did that mean that my identity as a mom was dead? And I really believe that in this grief journey, that's one of the things that as grieving people that we really struggle with, is it's not just our children that have died, it's our identity that has died, our identity as a mother. And in essence, there has been a death. Because you're not a mother, at least to a living child, anymore after a child dies. You're still a mother to your other children, but what about to the one that died, to Christopher? And that was just a major struggle for me. And so it was very difficult to clean out his apartment because I didn't want to let anything go. Did not want to let anything go. I wanted to keep it all because I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to say, he didn't need these things anymore. I was not ready to do that. So I tried to keep it all. I wasn't very rational. I will admit that. I was not rational at all. I'm trying to pack this stuff up and shift it back to South Dakota where I live because I just wasn't ready. I was not ready to say that he would not be coming back and he wouldn't need it anymore. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. So over the years, I've I've come to decide that I have to create a relationship with my son who I believe is still alive in spirit. It doesn't matter to me what you call the place where he's at, but to me, he's still alive in spirit. And there's a psychological theory called continuing bonds. And the theory of continuing bonds with grief means that you try to recreate the bond that you had with the deceased person, and you continue that even though they're still dead. Well, I just heard myself say still dead. Yeah, they're dead, all right. They're not coming back. But you continue to create the bonds with that person. And that's what I had to do. And I spent years trying to create that bond. I went to different mediums. I see people ask questions about this. It was helpful at first. I was desperate to find out if there was life after death. So I did a lot of research. I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of reaching out to different people. And I went to some mediums. And they were helpful. They were helpful in the respect that they provided me with information that I knew they couldn't possibly have. And I wanted so desperately to believe. And this is also, I got to say, a very individual belief. Some people will not be able to tolerate the fact that they believe that there's a life after death. I don't think that that's the important part of this conversation. The important part of this conversation is finding a way to continue the bond that you had with your deceased child, so that you continue to feel that identity that, yes, I am a mother. I am still a mother. Because for me, it was critical. It was critical for me, and my emotional health and my mental health well-being was to still consider myself Christopher's mother. Now, I still don't like to talk about it, and I will do everything I can to avoid it with new people. And I talked about this in a previous episode where I can't be vulnerable with you about my child unless I can trust you. And I'm sorry, after my child died, my trust in the world, my belief that the world is a kind and stable place doesn't exist anymore. The level of fear that I operate in is almost scary. And I've been told by people, well, you're just paranoid. You're just paranoid. Well, you know what? The worst has happened. And the problem with that is that death is uncontrollable. I can be the best person in the world. I can do everything exactly right. And there is no way to stop death from coming for my other child. There's no way. So you sit in anticipation because of the fear that you will have to go through that again. And it's so scary. So every incident, a minor incident for someone else, oh, my child fell and got hurt. Oh, my child's sick. They don't immediately go to worst case scenario. And I ask questions in all of my podcasts, and that's the question I would have for you guys today, which is that how many of you panic when something simple happens and become fearful that you're going to lose someone else? It's got to be my greatest fear, is that death will come knocking on my door again. And you know what? The only thing we're guaranteed of in life is that death will come knocking at our door again. So there's no way to avoid it. And that takes me back to the identity again. Because I don't know what I would do if I lost my second son. Because being a mom is so very important to me. And it was very important to me to be Christopher's mom. And it's very important to me to be Colin's mom. So if you're someone that loves someone that has lost a child, You need to understand their struggles about their identity and their questions about whether or not I'm still a mom. How am I going to answer these questions? It is an independent journey that they have to go through. And you can give them all the advice in the world, give them all your opinions, but what they need from you the most, what they need from you is to listen to them, because they have to work it out. They have to work it out for themselves. They have to decide, how am I going to answer these questions? How am I going to tell people that I lost a child? And more importantly, it's getting used to the fact that people don't respond to you when you tell them that you lost a child in a way that you would like. So you have to emotionally prepare yourself for the other person's reaction, because I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, it does not go well. Some people like me choose to not share that information. Other people put that information right out there and they say, in order to be friends with me, in order to connect with me, you have to accept that I lost a child. And very few people can do that. It's a very, very sad thing. And I haven't seen people, and I'll be honest, I haven't listened to other grief podcasts. I really don't want to, because I don't want it to impact what I want to talk about and the community that I'm trying to build. I want to be real. I want to be real about it. And as part of being real about it is being vulnerable about it. And that's part of my goals of this podcast, is to talk about the real. Because there's way too many times that when I try to talk about it with people, I just get cliches. They're in a better place. God must have really loved your child because he took him. Like, that stuff's not helpful. Not helpful. Not at all. So if you have someone in your life that lost a child, just listen. Just be there. And provide reassurance. And let them know that no matter how they answer the question, am I still a mom? That it is okay. We all have our reasons for how we answer those questions. We got to quit judging each other too for how we answer those questions. We all have our own personal stories. We all have our own ways of coping. So we have to support each other through it. And that's the most important thing. So thanks for listening. Today I can say that I am still Christopher's mother. I still have regular conversations with him, so if you see me talking to myself, don't judge. Every once in a while I see him pop up in my mind, and I know it's his way of saying hello. I know that I can say that I am Colin's mom. I'm very proud to be Colin's mom. And I get to see him on a regular basis too. Now, if you're a stranger and you come up to me and ask me how many children I have, I'm not going to answer that honestly. I will turn that question back around on you. But that's for my own health and safety. Because I have to be emotionally prepared to protect myself. So don't take offense. And for those of you that are still working out whether or not you're a mom and how you're going to answer these questions, know that whatever you choose is the right thing for you. If you want to support my podcast, I would really like to have some feedback. So if you could leave me a message, either on Instagram or Facebook on Grieving Insomniacs. I do have my website, Christy Haberman Counseling Services. I have a page just for my Grieving Insomniacs podcast. I'd like to hear from you. Tell me how you're doing. What kind of questions do you want answered? What kind of things do you want to know about? If I've experienced to help you feel like you're being heard. I also have a book on Amazon called The Solitary Journey Through the Loss of a Child. Thank you for listening. and have a great week. I'm honored that you listened, and I'm glad you showed up.